Cedar Ridge, Iowa, 8:15 p.m. I am staring at a number that is about to burn my life to the ground. My name is Lena Keller, and for 30 years, I was the safety net my family walked across. But the notification glowing on my phone screen isn't just a bill. It is a declaration of war. $13,900 for a luxury vacation I wasn't invited to, charged to a card I never used. They thought they could erase me while spending my future. They didn't know that tonight, the Bank of Lena was finally closing its doors forever. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. Here is my story. The sesame chicken was cold by the time I finally sat down to eat it, but that wasn't unusual. It was 8:15 p.m. on a Tuesday in Cedar Ridge, Iowa, and the heat in my rented studio apartment was rattling like a dying engine. I was still in my work clothes, gray slacks that had lost their crispness 10 hours ago, and a blouse that smelled faintly of the office toner cartridge. I worked as a senior accountant at a regional firm, a job that required precision logic and a complete lack of drama. My life was supposed to be a spreadsheet balanced, predictable, and solvent. I picked up my plastic fork, stabbed a piece of chicken, and unlocked my phone to check my emails one last time before bed. That was when my entire world tilted on its axis. A notification from my credit card company sat at the top of the screen. It wasn't a low balance alert or a payment confirmation. It was a transaction alert for a high-value purchase. I frowned, my thumb hovering over the glass. I hadn't bought anything other than gas in this takeout all week. I tapped the notification, expecting to see a fraud alert for a couple of $100s at a gas station in Florida, the usual headache. Instead, the number that flashed across my screen made my breath hitch in my throat. $13,900. The merchant was listed as Obsidian Travel Group, and the line item detail read, All-Inclusive Luxury Package, Puerto Vallarta, Oceanfront Suite, First Class Airfare, 3 adults. I stared at the number until the numbers blurred. $13,900. That was nearly half my savings. That was a down payment on a car. That was freedom. My fork clattered onto the laminate table, a sharp sound in the quiet room. I sat there paralyzed, the smell of soy sauce suddenly making me nauseous. In that moment, staring at the glowing screen in my dimly lit kitchen on the wrong side of town, a voice in the back of my head whispered a truth I had spent 30 years ignoring. I thought I understood how far my family was willing to go. I thought I knew the limits of their selfishness. Turns out I had no idea how easily they could erase me the second I stopped being useful. To understand why I didn't immediately call the police, you have to understand the Kellers. I was born into the role of the dependable one. I was the quiet kid in the back of the class, the one who did her homework on Friday nights, the one who was so mature for her age. My parents, Rick and Marlene, loved that about me. It meant they didn't have to worry. They were good people, or so everyone in our tight-knit community said. They were blue-collar, God-fearing, and obsessed with maintaining the image of the perfect American family. But the centerpiece of that image wasn't me. It was Troy. My younger brother Troy was the golden child. He was the high school football hero who was going to take the state title, the charming boy who smiled his way out of detention. I was the safety net. When Troy got his first DUI at 19, I was the one who drove him to his community service so Dad wouldn't find out. When he needed a car loan but had a credit score of 400, I co-signed. When he needed help filling out financial aid forms for the college he eventually dropped out of, I did the paperwork. I was the foundation buried in the dirt so the structure could look tall and pretty, but the house that was the twist of the knife. 4 years ago, at 26, I had achieved the impossible. I bought a 3-bedroom ranch house in a quiet cul-de-sac. It was my symbol of the American dream, the proof that my playing by the rules had paid off. 2 months after I closed on the house, my dad injured his back at work. He claimed he couldn't walk, couldn't work, and the disability checks were delayed. They were facing foreclosure, so being the good daughter, I offered them the guest rooms. Just temporarily, I said, until you get back on your feet. That was 4 years ago. Today, Rick, Marlene, and Troy live in my house. I pay the mortgage, I pay the property taxes, I pay the insurance. And when the tension became too much, when my mother started criticizing how I loaded my own dishwasher, and my father complained that my presence made it hard for him to relax, I moved out. I rented this cramping, drafty studio apartment 20 minutes away just to keep the peace while they spread out in the home I owned. I was essentially paying rent for my parents to live in my house while I lived in squalor. I snapped back to the present, my heart hammering against my ribs. I dialed the credit card company's fraud line, my hands shaking. "I need to report a charge," I told the representative, my voice tight. "There's a charge for nearly $14,000. I didn't make it. I'm in Iowa. I'm at work." The representative typed for a moment. "I see the charge, Ms. Keller. It was authorized online 2 hours ago. The contact email used for the confirmation was marlenakeller72@gmail.com. Does that sound familiar?" The air left the room. "Yes," I whispered. "That's my mother." "And the phone number linked to the travel itinerary ends in 4490. My mother's cell." "Yes. I can pull up the invoice details." The agent said, her voice softening, realizing this was a domestic issue, not a hacker. "The travel itinerary lists 3 passengers: Rick Keller, Marlene Keller, and Troy Keller." Silence. The agent waited. "Is my name on the reservation?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "No, ma'am, just those 3. They hadn't just dipped into my bank account. They hadn't just stolen money to pay a bill or fix a car. They had booked a luxury vacation for the family, specifically excluding the only member of the family who was actually paying for it. They had used my credit, my hard work, and my name to fund a celebration of their own existence, leaving me here in the cold with the bill. It wasn't theft. It was an ambush on my future." I hung up the phone without confirming the fraud yet. I just sat there, the silence of the apartment deafening. My pulse was a drum in my ears. The betrayal was so absolute, so casual, that I couldn't process the anger yet. I just felt cold. Then my phone rang. The screen lit up with a photo of my mother holding a glass of wine, smiling. She was calling. She knew the alert would hit my phone. She knew I would see it. I stared at the vibrating phone for a long time before I swiped right and held it to my ear. I didn't say hello. "Lena." Her voice was sharp, preemptive. There was no guilt in it, only irritation. "Lena, are you there?" I let out a shaky breath. "I'm here." "Good," she said, her tone cold and dismissive, like she was scolding a toddler. "Because before you start acting crazy, remember we're your parents. We didn't do anything wrong." "Didn't do anything wrong." I repeated the words, my voice trembling not with fear, but with a sudden spiking adrenaline that made my fingertips numb. "Mom, you charged $14,000 to my credit card. You booked a vacation for 3 people without even asking me. That is theft. That is a felony." On the other end of the line, Marlene let out a short, incredulous laugh, the kind she usually reserved for when a cashier made a mistake with her coupons. "Oh, Lena, stop being so dramatic. It's not like you were going to use that credit line anyway. You just let it sit there. It's wasteful." "It's not wasteful, it's my credit limit." I gripped the phone tighter. "And you didn't just use it. You maxed it out. How do you expect me to pay this off? Do you have $14,000 lying around?" "We needed this, Lena," she said, her tone shifting from dismissive to lecturing. "Your father has been in pain all winter with his back. And Troy, well, you know what kind of year your brother has had. He needs a win. He needs to feel like a man again after that harpy of a wife kicked him out." I closed my eyes, fighting the urge to scream. Troy's rough year was entirely self-inflicted. He had lost his job at the dealership because he stopped showing up, and his wife had filed for divorce because she caught him sexting a 19-year-old barista. But in the Keller household, Troy was always the victim of circumstance, and I was the eternal, bottomless resource meant to cushion his fall. "He cheated on his wife, Mom," I said through gritted teeth. "And he lost his job because he's lazy. Why am I paying for him to drink margaritas in a 5-star resort?" "Watch your mouth." My father's voice rumbled in the background, muffled but distinct. I could picture him sitting in my leather recliner in my living room, probably eating the snacks I'd bought. She makes good money, Marlene. Tell her to stop crying poverty. She can handle it. You heard your father, Marlene said, emboldened. You have that fancy job. You have no kids, no husband, no expenses besides that little apartment. You wouldn't even have that credit card if it wasn't for us raising you right, teaching you to be responsible. What's yours is family, Lena. That's how this works. That's how it's always worked. The audacity of it sat heavy in my chest. No expenses. I wanted to scream that I paid the mortgage on the roof over their heads. I paid the electricity that powered the phone she was holding. I paid the water bill for the shower she took this morning. I can't afford this, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. I am going to call the bank and dispute the charge. The line went dead silent for a second. Then Marlene's voice came back low and venomous. You will do no such thing. If you cancel this trip, Lena, I swear to God everyone at church will know exactly how ungrateful you are. I will tell them how you abandoned your sick father and your struggling brother just to hoard money. And don't think you'll see a dime when we pass, Rick shouted from the background. If you keep this up, don't come crying when we decide to erase you from the will. I almost laughed. The will. There was no money in the will. There was only debt and the house, my house, which they delusionally believed was theirs to bequeath. But the threat wasn't about money. It was about the emotional violence. It was the threat of exile. They were threatening to strip me of the one thing I had sacrificed everything to keep my place in the family. I stood there in my dark kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Memories flashed like strobe lights. I thought about college, working double shifts at the diner while my friends went on spring break, just so I wouldn't have to ask my parents for tuition money they didn't have. I thought about the car I drove for 10 years, until the floorboards rusted through. I thought about the relationships I'd let die because I was too busy taking care of my parents' crises. For decades, I had treated their needs as emergencies and my needs as optional. I had believed that if I just gave enough, if I was good enough, they would eventually love me as much as they loved Troy. But as I looked at the takeout container on my table and listened to my mother breathing impatiently on the phone, something inside me snapped. It wasn't a hot, fiery snap. It was like a piece of ice cracking underwater, sharp, clean, and irreversible. They didn't see me as a daughter. They saw me as a resource. A battery to be drained until it was dead and then discarded. They were going on a luxury vacation with my money, celebrating their family unit, and I wasn't even invited. I was just the sponsor. If I fought them now, they would cancel the trip, play the victim, and guilt me into submission like they always did. They would stay in my house, digging their ticks deeper into my skin. I needed them gone. I took a deep breath, and when I spoke, my voice was eerily calm. The shaking in my hands stopped. You're right, Mom, I said. Marlene hesitated. Excuse me. You're right, I repeated, forcing a softness into my tone that felt like swallowing glass. I was just shocked by the amount. But you guys do deserve a break. Dad's back has been bad and Troy, well, maybe this will help him get his head straight. I could practically hear Marlene inflating with triumph on the other end. Exactly. I knew you'd understand. A good daughter supports her parents, Lena. We sacrificed everything for you kids. Now it's your turn. Yeah, I said, staring at the wall. It's my turn. Enjoy the trip, Mom. Really. Soak it all in. We will, she said, her voice smug and satisfied. We fly out Thursday morning. Don't worry about checking in on the house we locked up tight. Okay, bye, Mom. I hung up the phone and placed it gently on the table. The silence that followed was different now. It wasn't the silence of a victim. It was the silence of a hunter waiting for the wind to change. I didn't finish my dinner. Instead, I walked over to the small closet by the entryway and pulled out a heavy fireproof file box. I carried it to the table, unlocked it, and flipped past my birth certificate and my social security card until I found the thick manila envelope I was looking for. I pulled out the deed to the house at 404 Maple Drive. I spread the papers out under the harsh kitchen light. I read every line. Grantee Lena Keller. Not Rick Keller. Not Marlene Keller. Just me. The mortgage statements were the same. The insurance policy same. Legally, they were guests. Guests who had overstayed their welcome by 4 years. If family means you can ruin my life without asking, I whispered to the empty room, maybe it's time I stopped playing by your definition. They wanted to go to Mexico, fine. They could go. But they were assuming they had a home to come back to. They assumed that because they were my parents, they owned me. I opened my laptop. The blue light illuminated my face as I typed a query into the search bar, my fingers moving with a deliberate, lethal precision. Can I sell a house if my parents live in it, but aren't on the deed? I hit enter, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel tired. I felt ready. The deed to the house wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a receipt for a life I had never actually owned. Staring at the legal description of the property, the memories didn't wash over me like a tide. They hit me like stones one after another, building the wall that had trapped me here. This wasn't a sudden theft. This was just the final invoice for a transaction that started when I was 6 years old. I remembered walking through the front door of our old rental chest, swelling with the kind of pride that feels like it might lift you off the ground. I was holding my report card, straight A's, perfect attendance, teachers' comments praising my diligence. I found my mother in the kitchen and held it up, waiting for the hug, the good job, the recognition. Marlene glanced at it, wiped her hands on a dish towel, and said, "That's nice, Lena, put it on the fridge." Then she looked past me. "Troy, did you tell Dad about the game?" Troy, who had spent the entire JV football game on the bench picking grass stains out of his cleats, was immediately swept up in a bear hug by my father. They took him out for ice cream to celebrate his team's spirit. I stayed home and studied for the next spelling test. It wasn't just affection. It was material, tangible theft. When I was 10, I spent a year doing extra chores, hoarding quarters in a jam jar to buy a bicycle, a purple Huffy with white tassels. I bought it with my own money, feeling a fierce sense of ownership I'd never felt before. 2 days later, Troy crashed his bike into a ditch. He came home wailing, his knee scraped. My father looked at Troy's bent rim, then at my gleaming new bike. "He can't ride that broken thing," Dad said. "Lena let him use yours until we fix his." When I protested, crying that it was mine, that I had paid for it, my mother knelt down, her face hard. "You are the older sister. You share. That is what good sisters do. Don't be selfish." I watched from the porch as Troy ripped the tassels off the handlebars because they were girly and rode my hard work into the ground. I never got it back. Christmas mornings were a masterclass in hierarchy. The living room floor would be buried under a mountain of wrapping paper, Troy's pile. Gaming consoles, name-brand sneakers, remote-controlled cars. My pile was neat, small, and practical. Socks. A generic daily planner. Maybe a paperback book if I was lucky. "Troy needs things to keep him occupied," Marlene would say, sensing my stare. "You're so good at entertaining yourself, Lena." The pattern calcified as we got older. I spent my teen years smelling like stale fryer grease, working shifts at the local diner to save for college. I went to community college for 2 years, then transferred to a state school, commuting from home to save money. Troy deserved a real chance. My parents took out second mortgages and high-interest loans to send him to a private liberal arts college where he majored in beer pong and minored in academic probation. When the loans weren't enough, they came to me. I was 22, fresh out of school, working my first real accounting job. "He needs a car to get to his internship," Dad had said, sliding the loan paperwork across the table. "My credit is shot, Lena. If you don't sign this, he can't get to work. Do you want to be the reason your brother fails? Don't threaten his future like that." So I signed, and 6 months later, I paid the first of many defaulted payments to keep my own credit from tanking. But the house was supposed to be the line they couldn't cross. 4 years ago, I closed on 404 Maple Drive. It was small, a 3-bedroom ranch that needed work, but it was mine. I had scraped together the down payment by skipping vacations, cooking cheap meals, and denying myself anything that wasn't essential. It was my sanctuary. 2 months later, Rick fell at work. A back injury. Subjective, hard to disprove, and coincidentally timed perfectly with layoffs at his plant. They were going to lose their rental. Just for a little while, I had said. The most expensive sentence of my life. Marlene didn't just move in, she colonized. Within a week, my throw pillows were in the trash, replaced by her floral ones because mine were too dreary. She rearranged the kitchen. She called it our home in conversation. Troy, fresh off his first divorce and, between opportunities, took the largest bedroom. Rick converted the third bedroom into his man cave, filling it with cigarette smoke and loud TV. My home office, I was forced to move my desk into the uninsulated garage. It's just temporary, Marlene would say while hanging family photos that didn't include me. My social life withered. I stopped inviting friends over because Marlene would hover criticizing their clothes or asking intrusive questions. When I started dating Evan, a kind, steady architect who actually saw me, the hostility became open warfare. He's not our type, Marlene sneered. He thinks he's better than us. When Evan tried to take me away for a weekend, Rick developed chest pains that miraculously vanished once I canceled the trip. Eventually, the tension suffocated us. I moved out of my own house and into the studio apartment, telling myself it was to give us space. In reality, I was fleeing the toxicity. But I kept paying the bills. Every single one. Evan didn't last. The night he broke up with me, he looked sad, not angry. "Lena, I love you," he said. "But you're in a cult. Your parents don't want you to have a life outside of them. They're going to erase you if you let them, and I can't watch it happen anymore." I had been angry at him then. I told myself he didn't understand family loyalty, but sitting here now in the silence of my apartment, staring at the deed, I realized Evan was right. They weren't just leaning on me, they were consuming me. They had taken my childhood, my money, my house, and now they were trying to take my future. I looked at the clock. It was late, but real estate agents never really slept. I remembered a name on a sign I passed every day on my way to work, a woman who looked fierce and capable, the kind of person who didn't let people walk all over her. I picked up my phone and dialed the number, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "No one gets to erase me," I whispered, the words tasting like iron. The phone rang twice. "Danielle Ortiz Remax," a brisk professional voice answered. "Hi," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, anchored by a lifetime of suppressed rage. "My name is Lena Keller. I have a house at 404 Maple Drive. I need to know how fast I can sell it." I paused, gripping the edge of the table. "There's just one complication. My parents are living in it, and I need to sell it without telling them." Danielle Ortiz was exactly what I needed, a shark in a tailored cream blazer. When she pulled up to the curb of 404 Maple Drive, she didn't look at the overgrown hydrangeas my mother had neglected. She looked at the foundation, the roofline, and the neighborhood comps. She shook my hand with a grip that suggested she took no prisoners, and for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of competence reflect back at me. "The market is shifting," Danielle said, her eyes scanning the facade. "But a starter home in this school district, if we price it aggressively, it moves. You said the occupants are leaving." "They fly out tomorrow morning," I said, my voice low. "I need everything ready to go the second their plane takes off." Walking into the house felt like stepping into a stranger's life that I was paying for. The living room was a chaos of open suitcases and resort wear. My mother Marlene was holding up a turquoise swimsuit that still had the tags on it, tags that would eventually appear on my credit card statement. She barely glanced at me or Danielle. "About time you stopped by," Marlene grumbled, stuffing the suit into a floral duffel bag. "Did you check the mail? And you need to call the plumber. The hot water took 10 minutes to kick in this morning. Unacceptable." I watched her, the criticism rolling off her tongue with the ease of a woman who had never paid a repair bill in her life. "I'll look into it," I said, my voice flat. In the den, my former dining room, Rick was sprawled on the recliner, flipping channels on the 60-inch TV I had bought for his birthday 2 years ago. He didn't even look up. "Tell your friend to wipe her feet," he barked at the screen. Troy was in the kitchen scrolling on his phone, a half-eaten sandwich on the counter. "Yo, Lena," he said without looking up. "I need a ride to the airport tomorrow, 6 a.m. Don't be late." He smirked at his screen. "Gotta get that sun. The ladies in Cancun won't know what hit 'em." Danielle stood by the entryway, her face an impassive mask, but I saw her eyes darting between the ungrateful occupants and me. She leaned in close. "I pulled the title this morning, Lena. Just to be thorough. You are the sole owner on the deed, no other names on the mortgage. Correct?" "Correct," I whispered. "I haven't lived here in 3 years." "Okay," she said, a new sharpness in her tone. "Then we don't need their permission. We just need them out of the way." I stood in the hallway watching my family prepare to celebrate their theft of my money. Marlene was humming to herself, holding up a sarong. She looked happy. She looked burden-free. And why wouldn't she be? She had successfully outsourced all her burdens to me. A wave of nausea hit me, followed by a cold, clarifying wash of realization. I had spent my life worshipping at the altar of this family, sacrificing my money, my comfort, and my dignity, hoping that if I bled enough they would finally bless me. But they weren't gods. They were parasites. And parasites don't love the host. They just feed until there's nothing left. "Am I betraying them?" the old voice in my head whimpered. Then I remembered Marlene's voice from the phone call. "What's yours is ours." "List it," I told Danielle, my voice cutting through the noise of the TV. "I want it sold before they get back. Can we do that?" Danielle didn't blink. "It'll be tight. We'll need to stage it fast. Photos tomorrow afternoon. Open house Saturday. Offers Sunday. In this market, it's possible." "Do it," I said. While Danielle took measurements, I moved through the house like a ghost. I wasn't there to clean. I was there to salvage. I went to the garage, pushing past boxes of Troy's old sports gear, and found the few dusty bins labeled Lena. I didn't take much: my high school yearbooks, a box of letters from my grandmother, the only person who had ever told me I was enough without adding a but. I took the photo albums from the hallway shelf, the ones that proved I had existed as a child, even if I was usually in the background of Troy's snapshots. I carried them out to my car one by one while my family argued about sunscreen SPF inside. Once I was back in the safety of my car, I made the second call. This one was harder. "Cardholder services, how can I help you?" "Hi," I said, staring at the front door of my house. "My name is Lena Keller. I need to dispute a charge of $13,900 to Obsidian Travel Group. It was unauthorized." "Okay, Ms. Keller, we can open an investigation. If we find the charge was made by a family member with access to your information, we may require a police report to process the fraud claim. Are you willing to proceed?" I watched Troy walk past the window, laughing at something on his phone. "Yes," I said. "I am willing to proceed. It was unauthorized use. I was not asked, and I did not approve it. We will issue a provisional credit while we investigate and freeze the card immediately." "Thank you." The next morning, I sat in my car down the street watching. At 6:15 a.m., an Uber, which I refused to pay for, picked them up. I watched them pile their luggage into the trunk. Rick, Marlene, Troy. They looked like a happy family going on an adventure. They didn't look back at the house. They didn't wonder where I was. They just assumed I would be there when they got back, ready to fix the water heater and pay the bill. As their taillights faded around the corner, I didn't feel sad. I felt light. By noon, Danielle's team was there. By 2 p.m., the listing was live. That evening, I stayed late at my office, not working but printing. I printed the deed, the mortgage payoff quote, the utility bills in my name, the insurance policy. I built a paper fortress around my decision. At 7 p.m., I drove past the house one last time. There was a young couple standing on the lawn with Danielle. The woman was pointing at the big oak tree, smiling, rubbing her pregnant belly. The man was nodding, looking at the roof, looking at it like it was a future, not a burden. "It's not my prison anymore," I said to the empty car. "For the first time, I'm not handing over my future, I'm taking it back." The pen felt heavy in my hand, not like a burden, but like a weapon I was finally learning to wield. The closing attorney, a gray-haired man who had seen too many divorces and not enough liberations, slid the final document across the mahogany table. "Just one more signature here, Ms. Keller, and the wire transfer will be initiated." I signed my name, Lena Keller, with a flourish I didn't know I possessed. It was done. The house at 404 Maple Drive, the physical vessel of my financial enslavement, was sold. The proceeds enough to wipe out my student loans, the car note, and the debt they had piled onto me hit my account 30 minutes later. I felt a phantom weight vanish from my shoulders, a sensation so physical it made me dizzy. I didn't go back to the apartment. I had already packed my life into the trunk of my used Corolla. 2 suitcases, a box of books, and the cat carrier. I dropped the house keys at the title company's front desk, got into my car, and drove west. I didn't have a plan beyond away. I booked a cabin near a national park 3 states over, a place where cell service was spotty, and the air didn't taste like obligation. By the time my parents' flight landed in Iowa, I was crossing the state line into Nebraska. I kept my phone off for the first 6 hours, needing the silence, needing to know that for this brief window, I was unreachable. But as the sun began to dip low over the flat plains, curiosity and dread got the better of me. I pulled into a gas station, the engine ticking as it cooled, and held the power button on my phone. It didn't just turn on, it detonated. The device vibrated so violently in my hand, it almost fell. 43 missed calls, 27 voicemails, 64 text messages. The notifications cascaded down the screen in a blur of names: Mom, Dad, Troy, Aunt Sarah, Cousin Riley. I sat in the front seat, the smell of gasoline and cornfields drifting in through the open window, and pressed play on the first voicemail. It was time-stamped 4:15 p.m., exactly the time they would have taken their Uber home from the airport. "Lena," Marlene's voice was high-pitched somewhere between confusion and rage. "Lena, pick up. We're at the house. The key doesn't work. And there are people in there. They're moving furniture. They say they bought the house. This is some kind of sick joke, right? Call us now." I skipped to a voicemail from 30 minutes later. This one was screaming. "The police are here," Marlene shrieked. "They're telling us we have to leave. They say we're trespassing in our own home. Where are you? Fix this, Lena. Tell them it's a mistake." Then a text from Troy. "What the hell did you do? All our stuff is in boxes in the garage. Mom is hyperventilating. You can't just erase your family because you're mad about one vacation. You're sick." I watched the words on the screen, waiting for the guilt to crush me. I waited for the old conditioning to kick in, the reflex to apologize and rush back to save them. But it didn't come. Instead, I looked at the timestamp of the text and thought about the $13,900 charge. They weren't mad that I was hurt. They were mad that the ATM had stopped dispensing cash. As I drove further west, the attacks morphed. My cousin Riley, the only one in the family who saw through the fog, sent me a series of screenshots. "Heads up," she wrote. "They're going scorched earth." The screenshots were from Facebook. Marlene had posted a status update tagging half the church congregation. "Please pray for us. Our daughter Lena has suffered a mental break. She sold our family home out from under us while we were away and has left her disabled father and struggling brother homeless. We are in shock at the cruelty. We don't know where she is." Below it, the comments were piling up. "How could she? I always thought she was so sweet. Ungrateful child." They were controlling the narrative. They were painting me as unstable to hide the fact that I was simply escaping. That was their final play, social execution. I pulled into a cheap motel off the interstate as night fell. The neon sign buzzed overhead. Inside the room, I opened my laptop. I wasn't going to hide. I wasn't going to let them write my history. I logged into Facebook. My hands were steady. I didn't write a poem. I didn't write a rant. I wrote a receipt. To everyone concerned about my parents, I typed, "Here are the facts. I bought the house at 404 Maple Drive 4 years ago. The deed was in my name only. My parents and brother lived there rent-free for 48 months, while I paid the mortgage taxes and insurance. I lived in a studio apartment to make space for them. Last week, my mother used my identity to charge $13,900 to my credit card for a luxury vacation for herself, my father, and my brother. I was not asked. I was not invited. When I confronted them, they told me that my money belonged to the family. I didn't ambush my parents. I stopped letting them ambush me. They spent years trying to erase me. All I erased was their access to my bank account. I am not having a mental breakdown. For the first time in my life, I am seeing clearly. I attached a redacted photo of the deed showing only my name and a screenshot of the unauthorized travel invoice. I hit post. Then I disabled comments. The final step was the hardest yet the most necessary. I opened my group chat with Rick, Marlene, and Troy. I typed one final message. The house was mine. The debt was mine. The life you expected me to sacrifice for you was mine. I'm done. Do not contact me again. I hit send. Then I blocked them. I blocked their numbers. I blocked their emails. I blocked their social media accounts. I blocked the flying monkeys from church. One by one, I severed the digital tethers that had bound me to their expectations. I closed the laptop and walked outside. The motel was situated on the edge of the plains where the sky felt impossibly big. The sun was just a sliver of red on the horizon, giving way to a deep bruising purple. The air was cold and clean. I thought about them back in Cedar Ridge, probably sitting in a hotel room I wasn't paying for, realizing that no one was coming to fix it. I thought about the silence of my phone. I had no idea what waited for me out there on the road. I didn't have a job lined up yet. I didn't have a permanent address. But as I looked at the first stars pricking the darkness above the highway, I realized I had something better. For the first time since I was a kid, the future felt like it actually belonged to me. 3 months later, the view from my window wasn't a gray Midwestern parking lot. It was the jagged, snow-dusted spine of the Rocky Mountains cutting through a cobalt sky. I had landed in Denver, a city that felt like it was breathing, while my hometown had been holding its breath. My new apartment was a one-bedroom in a walk-up near the Highlands. It was sunny, filled with plants I finally had the energy to keep alive, and most importantly, it was silent. When I locked the door at night, it stayed locked. No one had a key but me. I had secured a job at a boutique financial consulting firm within weeks of arriving. The culture shock was visceral. In my first week, when a project manager asked if I could work the weekend to fix a client's error, I felt the old panic rise, the reflex to lay myself down as a bridge for others to walk over. I started to say yes, but then I remembered the promise I'd made on that highway in Nebraska. "I actually have plans," I had said, my voice trembling slightly. The manager didn't scream. He didn't guilt-trip me. He just nodded and said, "No problem, we'll tackle it Monday." I went to the bathroom and cried for 10 minutes, not out of sadness, but out of the sheer relief of being treated like a human being rather than an appliance. Healing, however, wasn't just about geography. It was about excavation. I started seeing Dr. Patel, a therapist with kind eyes and a spine of steel. She gave a name to what had happened to me, parentification. "You weren't just a daughter, Lena," she told me during a session where I was trying to rationalize my guilt. "You were a spouse to your parents and a parent to your brother. They groomed you to be their emotional and financial regulator. When you said no, you didn't just break a rule, you broke the system they built their survival on." Learning that saying no wasn't a betrayal, but an act of survival was like learning a new language. I practiced it in the mirror. I practiced it with telemarketers. I practiced it until the words stopped tasting like ash in my mouth. I kept my digital blockade against my immediate family firm, but I kept a back channel open through my cousin Riley. She was the only one who didn't drink the Kool-Aid. Through her texts, I watched the fallout of my departure, like one watches a demolition from a safe distance. It was ugly. Without my income to prop up their delusions of grandeur, reality had come for Rick and Marlene with a vengeance. They had been evicted from the motel after a week. Now they were renting a cramping second-floor apartment above a failing strip mall on the edge of town. Riley sent me a photo once it showed the neon light of a liquor store buzzing right outside their living room window. "Your mom is working part-time at the grocery store," Riley texted. "The one she used to refuse to shop at because she said it was dirty. She's bagging groceries for people she used to brag to at church." My dad, she reported, was more bitter than ever, his disability miraculously allowing him to sit at the local dive bar but not to work. The community was split. The die-hard traditionalists thought I was a monster, but a surprising number of people were whispering the truth. "They bled that girl dry," Mrs. Higgins from the choir had apparently said loud enough for Marlene to hear. And then there was Troy. Riley said he had tried to step up, tried to be the man of the house, but without my safety net, he had collapsed under the weight of our parents' expectations. He had moved out of state with a new girlfriend, fleeing just like I did. I thought that was the end of it, until the knock on my door came on a rainy Tuesday evening. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole and froze. It was Troy. He looked 10 years older than the last time I saw him. He was thinner, his golden boy shine tarnished by exhaustion, wearing a jacket that was too thin for the mountain chill. I debated not opening the door. I debated calling the police. But curiosity, or maybe a lingering ghost of sisterhood, made me turn the lock. "I don't have money, Troy," was the first thing I said. I stood in the doorway blocking his entry. He laughed, a dry, hacking sound. "I know. I didn't come for money." He looked at his shoes. "Can I just come in for a minute? I've been driving for 2 days." I let him into the living room but didn't offer him a seat. He stood awkwardly by the couch looking around at the piece I had built. "They did it to me, Lena," he said quietly. "What? Mom and Dad? After you left, they turned on me." He ran a hand through his hair. "I got a job at a warehouse. Hard work. I brought home a paycheck and Mom took it. Said it was for back rent for raising me. Dad started screaming at me if I didn't fix his dinner. They expected me to be you." He looked up, his eyes rimmed with red. "I wanted to blame you so bad. I wanted to hate you for leaving me with them. But then I realized, they're the ones who broke everything. You were just the shield, and when you left I got hit with the arrows." He apologized then. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was real. He apologized for the mocking, for the car loan I paid off, for letting me drown while he floated. "I'm broke," he admitted. "My girlfriend kicked me out. I don't know what to do." The old Lena would have opened her wallet. The old Lena would have told him to take the couch. But Dr. Patel's voice rang in my head. "You can care without being consumed." "I won't be your bank, Troy," I said, my voice steady. "And you can't live here." His shoulders slumped. "Okay, I get it. But," I continued, "if you really want out of the cycle, I can help you. I'll help you make a budget. I'll help you look at your credit report and figure out how to fix it. I'll help you find a cheap room to rent on Craigslist. But I won't give you a dime." Troy looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in his life. He didn't see a resource. He saw a sister. "I'd like that," he whispered. I walked him to the elevator an hour later. We had a plan. He had a lead on a construction job and a hostel for the night. As the doors slid open, I felt a mix of sadness for the brother I never really had, and relief for the boundaries I finally did. "They used to threaten to disown us if we didn't obey," I said as he stepped in. Troy nodded grimly. "Yeah, they acted like their approval was oxygen." "Turns out," I smiled, "losing their approval wasn't death, it was the start of my life." The doors closed and I walked back to my apartment alone and entirely whole. The sun was setting over the Rockies, painting the snow-capped peaks in shades of bruised purple and burning gold, a view that still felt too expensive for a girl like me to own. I sat on the balcony of my apartment, my legs draped over the side of the patio chair. a mug of chamomile tea warming my hands. Barnaby, the stray tabby cat I had adopted 3 months ago, mostly because he was scrappy and independent just like me, was curled in a vibrating ball of fur on my lap. The air was crisp, smelling of pine needles and the distant promise of winter, but for the first time in my life, the cold didn't make me shiver. It just made me feel alive. We had just gotten back from a weekend hiking trip in Estes Park. My legs ached in that satisfying, earned way that comes from climbing something massive. Inside the apartment, I could hear Matt unpacking the cooler. Matt was a landscape architect I'd met at a bookstore 6 months ago. He was gentle with calloused hands and a laugh that didn't demand anything from me. Earlier when we got home, he hadn't collapsed on the couch and waited for me to make dinner. He had kissed my forehead, taken my muddy boots to the entryway, and started washing the camping gear himself. It was a small thing, but every time he acted like a partner instead of a passenger, a little piece of the old knot in my chest unraveled. I was learning that love wasn't about how much you could endure for someone. It was about how much you could grow beside them. My life had expanded in ways I never could have predicted back in that dark kitchen in Iowa. I had been promoted to a team lead position at the consulting firm, where my ability to spot financial discrepancies, honed by years of managing my parents' chaotic spending, was considered a superpower, not a burden. But my real work, the work that woke me up in the morning, happened on Tuesday nights. I had started running a small free workshop at the local community center called Money and Boundaries for Adult Children. It started with 3 people. Last week there were 20. I sat in a circle with nurses, teachers, and construction workers who all carried the same haunted look I used to have. We talked about guilt. We talked about the difference between helping and enabling. We talked about how no is a complete sentence. Helping them navigate the fog of familial obligation turned my own scars into a roadmap. My story wasn't a secret shame anymore. It was an act of service. But the past I learned doesn't just vanish. It tries to claw its way back in through the mail slot. On the small bistro table next to my tea sat a thick, cream-colored envelope. It had arrived 2 days ago. I had recognized the handwriting immediately. Spiky rushed, leaning aggressively to the right. Marlene. I hadn't opened it for 48 hours. I simply hadn't felt the urgency. But tonight, with the mountains standing guard in the distance, I felt strong enough. I slid a finger under the flap and tore it open. 3 pages of lined notebook paper covered in blue ink. I began to read. There was no "Dear Lena." It just started. I hope you're happy with yourself. Your father can barely walk to the bathroom now. We are living in a shoebox because of what you did. The landlord is threatening to raise the rent, and we have nowhere to go. I scanned the paragraphs looking for the words, "I'm sorry." I looked for, "We miss you." I looked for, "We were wrong." They weren't there. Instead, I found the greatest hits of Marlene's manipulation. "You destroyed this family. You care more about money than your own blood. God sees what you've done. You need to fix this before we die, or you'll live with this guilt forever." She was playing the old songs, but the acoustics had changed. I wasn't in the echo chamber anymore. I read the words, and I waited for the crushing weight of obligation to flatten me. I waited for the panic that used to send me scrambling to my banking app to transfer funds I didn't have. But all I felt was a quiet, profound sadness. Not for me, but for them. They were still trapped in the same cycle of entitlement and victimhood, expecting the world to cater to them while I was breathing free air. I put the letter down. I didn't cry. I didn't call Riley to vent. I simply stood up, walked into my home office, and turned on the shredder. The mechanical whir was loud in the quiet room. I fed the pages in one by one. I watched the accusations, the guilt trips, and the demands turn into harmless confetti. I sat down at my desk and opened my journal. For a moment, I thought about writing a reply. I thought about explaining one last time that I hadn't destroyed the family. I had just stopped letting the family destroy me. But I realized they wouldn't hear it. They were committed to their version of the story, the one where I was the villain and they were the martyrs, so I wrote for myself. They tried to erase me by turning me into a tool. I saved myself by stepping off their altar. I am still their daughter, but I am no longer their sacrifice. I closed the journal and felt a sense of finality settle over me like a warm blanket. "Hey," Matt's voice came from the doorway. He was leaning against the frame holding two heavy coats. "You ready? The forecast says the sky is going to be clear tonight. Perfect for stargazing." I looked at him, then back at the pile of paper shreds in the bin. "Yeah," I said, smiling. "I'm ready." We drove out of the city, winding up the canyon roads until the lights of Denver were just a glowing smear in the rearview mirror. We pulled over at an overlook high above the tree line. The air was thin and cold, biting at my cheeks. We stood side by side looking up. The universe was spilled out above us, a chaotic, beautiful spray of diamonds on black velvet. It was vast and indifferent, and in its presence my family's drama felt microscopically small. I thought briefly of the old house on Maple Drive. I thought of my parents in their cramped apartment stewing in their bitterness. I thought of Troy somewhere out there trying to learn how to stand on his own 2 feet. In the end, I didn't get the family I wanted. I didn't get the unconditional love I had worked so hard to buy. But standing there under the Milky Way, I realized I had gotten something far more valuable. I had gotten my own life. They could tell whatever story they wanted about me back in Cedar Ridge. They could paint me as the villain in their tragedy. What they couldn't do, what they would never be able to do again, was erase me. "Look," Matt pointed, tracing a constellation. "Orion." "I see it," I whispered. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sharp, clean mountain air. The future was wide open, terrifying and wonderful, and for the first time every single part of it belonged to me. And so Lena Keller finally found the peace she had purchased with hard-won independence, leaving the echoes of her old life behind in the mountain air. If you found Lena's stand against exploitation inspiring, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of shocking betrayal and ultimate redemption. We read every single comment of your thoughts and experiences down below. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Radiance. We'll see you next time.